The galaxy had forgotten humanity, not with cruelty, not with deliberate erasure, but with the quiet indifference of time. Millennia had stretched long, empires had risen and collapsed, and the dust of ages had covered the memory of a species once fierce and radiant. Their ships had once thundered across the stars, their laughter had once mingled with the voices of allies, and their wars had left scars upon 1,000 worlds. But the last echoes faded. The galaxies grew used to their absence, and the younger civilizations knew them only as a tale for scholars and dreamers. Among the great stellar libraries, humanity's name appeared as little more than a footnote, a race of bold explorers, passionate and volatile, who burned too brightly and vanished too swiftly. There were songs that hinted of them, fragments of stories in alien tongues, but no living voice remained to correct the words. No witness left to say, "This is who we were," and so humanity became myth. Yet myths are stubborn things. They linger in shadows carried like whispers by the curious, remembered by those who look too long into the past, and sometimes myths wait. Far beyond the safe lanes of known space, beyond the territories of the mighty empires, drifted a single vessel of the ardent kin. They were not conquerors, nor builders of thrones. The ardent kin were seekers, gentle scholars with skin that shimmered like pearl and eyes bright as moons. They wandered where others would not, chasing the fragments of knowledge left behind by civilizations long crumbled. Their vessel, the Veyara, moved in silence across an uncharted region where even starlight seemed hesitant to shine. The crew had not expected discovery here, only emptiness. But fate, or perhaps something greater, had other designs. On the third day of their survey, their sensors stirred with a signal faint as a breath, not the rhythmic pulse of a star, not the cold voice of a machine still dutiful after eons. No, it was the heartbeat of something ancient and deliberate. The ardent kin gathered, their faces pale with awe, as the Veyara closed upon the source. There, adrift in darkness, rested a capsule. Its hull bore wounds of time and journey, scarred and weathered. Symbols etched into its side were unknown to the crew, yet carried a weight that pressed upon the heart, as if the letters themselves demanded reverence. The capsule pulsed with life, barely, weak, fragile, but present. Within it, in slumber deeper than centuries, lay a figure unlike any the ardent kin had ever seen. They dared not disturb it at once. Instead, they whispered among themselves, voices hushed. Some believed it was a remnant of an ancient empire. Others feared it might be a trap left by forgotten wars. But Saral, their captain, stood before the capsule and placed a hand upon the glass. She had read of them in dusty tomes, in fragments of verses, in the cracks between history and myth. The name rose unbidden from her lips, trembling like a prayer. Human. The crew stirred. The word felt strange upon their tongues, as though it were both forbidden and sacred. Humans were legends woven into cautionary tales of ambition and stories of hope, but no one truly believed they had ever existed. And yet, here, before them, was proof. Saral's heart beat faster. She felt the weight of what had been found pressing against her soul. For to awaken a legend is to invite destiny, and destiny does not come without cost. Still, she gave the order. The capsule was brought aboard. Its systems, though ancient, stirred with reluctant grace. Lights flickered, power hummed, and the being within stirred. The ardent kin held their breath, and then eyes opened. They were not alien eyes, not strange or incomprehensible. They were human eyes, deep and searching, carrying a fire so raw and unyielding that even the stars outside seemed to pause. The silence of ages had been broken. Humanity had returned. The chamber was dim, lit only by the soft pulse of machines that had labored in silence for longer than any memory could recall. Frost clung to the glass of the capsule, melting into rivulets that traced downward like tears. Within, a figure shifted. Slowly, painfully, the long stillness of ages began to unravel. The ardent kin gathered close, their luminous eyes wide. Their breaths came shallow and fast, for they were witnessing something that had no place in the living galaxy. A man from the time of myths. With a shudder, the capsule hissed. The glass receded, and the air filled with the sharp scent of age and ozone. The figure inside drew a breath, ragged and uncertain, as though the very act of living had become a forgotten art. His chest rose, fell and rose again, each time steadier, stronger. His eyelids trembled, then opened. They were human eyes, dark, steady, alive with a depth the ardent kin had never seen before. In them burned a storm, fierce and unbroken, as though all the centuries of silence had been gathered into that single gaze. He coughed, his body weak from the long slumber. His hands, scarred and calloused though thin from disuse, gripped the edge of the capsule. He forced himself upright, every movement an act of will. Siral, captain of the Viara, stepped forward. Her voice was soft, reverent. "You are human?" The man's head turned toward her, his expression bewildered yet certain. His voice, when it came, was rough, cracked with disuse, yet carried an unmistakable strength. "Yes," he whispered, tasting the word as though it were both a memory and a promise. "I am human." The crew of the Viara exchanged awed glances. They had spoken the word before, but only as myth, only in wonder. To hear it declared by one who bore its flesh was to feel history itself awaken. The man breathed deeply, filling his lungs as if to claim the galaxy anew. He looked past them, to the viewport that framed the cold beauty of the stars. His face grew still. The constellations were strange to him, yet they stirred memories buried deep. Oceans, fire, the sound of rain, the cries of countless voices. "And the fall. Always the fall. What is your name?" Cyril asked gently. For a long moment silence stretched. Names carried weight. To speak one was to tether oneself to the present, to admit belonging to life again. At last he answered, "Elias." The name filled the chamber like a beacon, simple yet unyielding. Cyril inclined her head. "Elias, you were found adrift. Your people, they are not here." He closed his eyes and grief flickered across his face. Not the grief of a moment, but the grief of centuries. A loneliness vast as the void itself pressed down upon him. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "Then it is true. We are gone." The ardent kin lowered their gazes. They had no comfort to offer. For them, humanity had always been a legend. But for Elias, it was blood, memory, and home. To awaken into a universe without them was to awaken into exile. And yet, though his shoulders trembled, though sorrow bent his spirit, he did not break. He lifted his head, and in his eyes burned that storm again. "Not lost," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "Only waiting." The words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant, as if daring the universe to deny them. Saral stepped closer, her voice filled with both awe and caution. "Elias, the galaxy you once knew is gone. The empires that stand now are cruel, fractured. The people suffer beneath them. We have no strength to resist, only to endure." Elias studied her, then looked once more at the stars. Though the weight of loss pressed against him, another truth stirred in his chest, a truth older than despair. Humanity had always endured. They had been broken, battered, scattered, yet always they rose again. He clenched his fist, feeling blood flow hot through his veins, as though fire itself had been rekindled within him. If he was the last, then he would not be the end. Elias walked the halls of the Viara slowly, his steps unsteady yet purposeful. His muscles, long dormant, trembled with each movement, but his gaze was steady, his spirit unwilling to falter. Everywhere he looked, he found reminders that he no longer belonged to the age he remembered. Strange glyphs lit the walls, machines hummed with alien resonance, and the voices around him spoke with tones unlike any he had heard before. The ardent kin observed him carefully. To them he was both guest and mystery. They whispered of him in the quiet, calling him the last ember of a vanished fire. Elias did not correct them. He did not yet know whether to believe it himself. Siral remained at his side, guiding him, telling him of the galaxy as it now stood. She spoke with sorrow, for hers was a tale of decline. Once, she said, the stars were bound together by alliances of trust. Worlds shared strength, knowledge, and protection. But now, her voice grew quiet, now the galaxy has broken into shards. Empires of cruelty hold vast domains. The strong consume the weak. The free must hide in the cracks or bend their knees. She showed him the records, fleets of cold steel darkening skies, cities crushed beneath the weight of oppression, entire species enslaved or scattered. The more Elias listened, the more his chest ached. In his mind he saw flashes of Earth, of his people. They too had known strife and cruelty. Yet there had also been moments of greatness, compassion, discovery, resilience. Humanity had risen from ashes more than once. Could it be that the galaxy had forgotten not only their faces but also their lesson? He found himself standing before the viewport, watching the stars wheel endlessly beyond. Their beauty was unmarred, but behind them lay a truth that hollowed him. Humanity was not there. No Earth, no colonies, no voices calling his name. He whispered to the darkness, "We dreamed of the stars, and now the stars dream without us." His hand pressed against the cold glass. He felt small, unbearably small in a galaxy that had moved on. And yet deep within him something stirred, a flicker of fire that no sorrow could smother. Sorrel stood behind him, silent, watching. She had seen despair break even the strongest of her kin. Yet Elias did not break. His grief was sharp, his loss beyond measure, but it did not consume him. Instead it seemed to shape him, tempering him as flame tempers steel. Later, when the crew gathered to share their evening meal, Elias joined them. Their food was strange to him, its flavors foreign, yet he accepted it without complaint. He listened to their quiet conversations, their worries about the encroaching empires, their fears of raids. He saw in their luminous eyes a weariness that spoke of lives lived in the shadow of fear. At last he spoke. His voice was steady, though soft. "You endure. Even when hope feels lost, you endure." The ardent kin looked at him with surprise. For them, endurance was not a choice but a necessity, a slow survival in a broken galaxy. But Elias's words carried a different weight. For him, endurance was not mere survival. It was defiance. That night, as he lay in the small chamber they had given him, Elias could not sleep. Memories pressed against him. He remembered the rise of humanity, their triumphs, their mistakes, their endless hunger for more. He remembered the wars that had scarred them, the sacrifices that had broken them, the courage that had lifted them again and again. Humanity was flawed, yes, but they had always risen. He sat upright, breath quickening. A truth had come upon him like lightning. If he truly was the last, then the burden was his alone to carry. He could not undo what had been lost, but he could choose what would come next. He could be humanity's end or humanity's beginning. And in the silent chamber of the Veyara, Elias clenched his hand into a fist. "I will not be the end." His words echoed softly against the walls, but in the quiet of the galaxy they rang like thunder. The days aboard the Veyara passed in uneasy quiet. Elias grew stronger, his body shaking off the long years of stillness, though his mind carried a weight no rest could lighten. The ardent kin watched him with fascination. To them he was living history, a remnant of fire wrapped in fragile flesh. But history does not sleep forever. The warning came one dusk cycle, when the ship's sensors shrieked with sudden alarm. A fleet of raiders had cut across the void, black ships like the fangs of a beast. Their signals were sharp, demanding, merciless. They had come to strip the Veyara bare, cargo, knowledge, crew, and life. The ardent kin panicked. They were scholars, not warriors. Their vessel had no weapons strong enough to deter predators. Their only hope was to surrender and pray for mercy. But in this galaxy, mercy was a forgotten word. In the heart of the ship, Elias heard the tremor in their voices. He felt their despair like a storm pressing against him. He rose, his steps firm despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "Do nothing," Sorrel pleaded, meeting him in the corridor. Her luminous eyes brimmed with fear. "You cannot fight them, none can. We must yield or they will destroy us all." Elias studied her, then spoke with a calm that startled her. "If you yield, you will lose everything. If you fight, you may lose your lives. But if you stand, you will remember who you are." Sorrel's lips parted, but no words came. When the raiders boarded, their laughter filled the halls. They strode with arrogance, armored in steel and cruelty. They looked upon the ardent kin with contempt, seeing only trembling scholars ripe for plunder. And when they saw Elias, unarmed, unarmored, standing alone in the corridor, they laughed even louder. "What is this?" their leader sneered. "A relic wrapped in skin? You would defy us with this?" Elias said nothing. His gaze locked with theirs, unwavering. His stance was unshaken, though his hands bore no weapon. The raiders jeered. One stepped forward, lifting a blade to strike him down. The crew of the Veyara cried out, expecting blood. But then something happened. Elias did not step back. He did not flinch. He looked directly into the eyes of his foe, and in that gaze was a storm. Raw and unyielding, a force older than empires. His voice rang out, not loud, not angry, but like iron hammered in flame. You will not touch them. The raider hesitated. His arm, once steady, faltered. Something in Elias's tone struck deeper than steel. Around him the others shifted uneasily, their laughter fading into silence. Elias took a step forward. His body was frail compared to theirs, but his spirit filled the corridor like a fire that refused to die. He spoke again, and his words burned. You mistake weakness for surrender. You mistake peace for fear. But I tell you this. If you strike, you will awaken something greater than you can imagine. I am human, and humanity does not kneel. The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. The raiders, seasoned in cruelty, felt a shiver of doubt coil in their chests. This was no ordinary prey. This was a legend made flesh, and legends carry weight even in the hearts of monsters. The leader snarled, yet his eyes betrayed unease. He gave a sharp command, and the raiders withdrew, spitting curses as they retreated to their ships. None dared strike the final blow. The fire in Elias's voice had robbed them of their courage. When the last of them was gone, the ardent kin stood in stunned quiet. They turned to Elias, their faces filled with awe. He had not lifted a weapon, yet he had driven away the wolves. Saral stepped forward, her voice trembling. How did you do this? Elias's chest rose and fell. His body trembled with the effort, but his eyes still burned. He answered simply, because sometimes the will to stand is stronger than the power to strike. The crew bowed their heads, for they understood they had seen not merely a man, but the fire of humanity itself alive once more. And in that moment, for the first time in centuries, another species believed. The raiders were gone, their ships retreating into the black, but the silence they left behind pressed heavy upon the Veyara. The ardent kin had been spared, yet their relief was not complete. They had seen Elias stand alone against death itself, had felt the fire of his words burn in their bones, and though it saved them, it unsettled them too. Elias returned to his chamber, his steps slower now, the weight of what had passed heavy upon his shoulders. When the door closed behind him, he sank to the floor. His hands trembled, his chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, for though he had stood unbroken, though he had spoken with fire, inside he felt the echo of something far greater than fear. Grief. Not for himself, but for those who could no longer speak, for the countless human voices that would never be heard again. He pressed his palms to his face, and tears came unbidden. He wept quietly, his sobs swallowed by the hum of the ship. Memories spilled through him, faces of his people, smiles, laughter, arguments, promises whispered in the night. He remembered the skies of earth, the salt of oceans, the warmth of fire on winter nights. And he remembered the fall, worlds burning, silence spreading, humanity scattering until nothing remained. He carried them all within him, and the burden was crushing. When the tears subsided, he whispered to the empty chamber, I should have been among them. I should have fallen when they did. Why am I here when they are gone? The door slid open softly. Saral stepped inside. Her presence was gentle like moonlight, her luminous eyes reflecting his sorrow. She had given him space, but she had also known she could not leave him to bear this weight alone. She knelt beside him, her voice a whisper. You carry the grief of 1,000 worlds, Elias. No heart should bear so much alone. Elias shook his head. It is not choice. It is truth. I am the last. Every smile, every cry, every dream of my people gone. I cannot bring them back. Saral placed her hand lightly upon his arm. Perhaps not. But their memory lives in you. And memory can be a chain. Or wings. Her words settled over him like a quiet dawn. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers. In her eyes he saw no judgment, only understanding. And it was then he realized, though she was not human, she carried her own sorrows, her own losses. The galaxy was filled with brokenness, not just his own. For a long time they sat in silence. Then Elias spoke, his voice low but resolute. "If I rise, it will not be for myself. It will be for them. For all of them." Siral nodded, her expression solemn. "Then you will not rise alone." That night Elias did not sleep. Instead he walked the quiet corridors of the Vayara, his hand brushing against the cold metal walls. He felt the presence of his people with him, not in flesh, not in voice, but in memory. Each step was heavy, yet with each step the fire within him grew. He realized something vital. He was not merely a survivor. He was a witness, the last keeper of humanity's story, and if he chose to remain silent, then truly they would be lost. But if he chose to speak, to stand, to fight, then humanity would live on in the hearts of others. The burden had not lessened, but it had changed. Where grief had weighed him down, purpose now lifted him. The chains were becoming wings. The next morning, when the ardent kin gathered, they found Elias already waiting for them. His shoulders were straight, his eyes steady. He was still grieving, perhaps he always would, but he was no longer broken. He looked upon them and said, "I cannot return my people to life, but I can carry them forward, and if I must walk this path alone, then so be it. Yet I believe none of us are truly alone." The ardent kin felt the truth of his words, and in that moment, a shift occurred among them. They no longer saw Elias as a relic. They saw him as a beginning. The story of the human did not remain aboard the Vayara. Whispers have wings in every age, and in a galaxy starved for hope, whispers fly faster than light. The ardent kin, once a people overlooked, now carried with them a secret too powerful to hide. At outposts and stations among traders and wanderers, they told of a man who had awoken from the silence of centuries. A man who stood unarmed before raiders and did not bend. A man whose words carried fire enough to send predators fleeing. The name spread, Elias. And with it, a word older than memory, human. For some, it was nothing more than a curiosity. A ghost of the past stumbling into the present. But for many, the story struck deep. The enslaved whispered it in chains. The oppressed clung to it in their hiding places. The weary and the hopeless repeated it to themselves, as if the name alone gave them strength. Elias did not seek this. He lived quietly among the ardent kin, helping where he could, learning of the galaxy's wounds. Yet wherever he went, eyes followed him. Strangers came forward, not with weapons, but with questions. "Is it true you are human?" They would ask, their voices trembling, and Elias would nod. "I am." Some would weep. Others would bow. A few would simply touch his hand as though to prove he was real. And each time Elias felt the weight upon him grow heavier. He was no longer only himself. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols cannot walk away. One evening, aboard a small station in neutral space, he was approached by a woman unlike any he had met before. She was no ardent kin, but a Drail, a tall, angular species known for their resilience in battle. Yet her armor was dented, her body scarred, her eyes weary. "I fought for freedom," she said. "We failed. My people are scattered. My family is gone. But I heard your name, human, and I came." Elias studied her, his chest tight with the weight of her words. "Why?" "Because," she said simply, "if even one ember of humanity still burns, then hope has not died." Others came after her, an outcast pilot, a healer whose people had been enslaved, wanderers who had no flag to call their own. They were not human, yet they gathered around Elias because in him they saw something they had lost in themselves. He did not call them soldiers. He did not ask them to fight. But they began to call themselves something new, the Unbroken. For in the human they found more than a man. They found a truth that transcended flesh and blood. Humanity was not only a species. It was a spirit, a refusal to kneel, a fire that rose even from ashes. And anyone who chose to carry that fire became, in their own way, human too. Elias struggled with this at first. He feared he was no more than a shadow of the past, unworthy of such trust. But Siral reminded him gently, "Symbols are not chosen, Elias. They are forged in the hearts of others. So he accepted it, not with pride, but with humility. If his presence could spark courage in even one heart, then he would give himself wholly to that purpose. The Unbroken grew. A small fleet of patched ships came under their banner, not of conquest but of defiance. They did not strike blindly. They freed the enslaved. They defended the weak. They stood where others would kneel. And everywhere they went, the legend grew louder. Tyrants heard the name and ground their teeth. For centuries they had ruled with impunity. Now a single man and those who rallied to him threatened their order, not with overwhelming power but with hope. And hope is the one weapon no empire can silence. One night Elias stood on the bridge of the Veyara, looking out at the stars. The crew around him was no longer only ardent kin. It was a mosaic of many peoples, bound not by blood but by choice. Saral stood beside him. "Do you see, Elias? Humanity is not gone. It lives in all who choose to be unbroken." Elias's hand tightened into a fist, his voice steady. "Then humanity has returned, not in flesh but in spirit. And this time we rise together." And across the stars the whisper became a cry. The Unbroken had become more than a whisper. They had become a flame. Small, fragile, but undeniable. And like all flames, they drew the eyes of those who feared the light. One empire, vast and merciless, could no longer ignore them. Its fleets were the scourge of half the galaxy. Armadas forged in the furnaces of oppression, commanded by rulers who believed themselves eternal. To them, the rise of hope was not merely an inconvenience. It was a threat, and so they came. The day began with shadows. Hundreds of ships blotted out the starlight, a wall of steel and fire stretching beyond sight. Their arrival sent ripples of dread across the stars. Worlds closed their ports, traitors silenced their signals, and even the boldest whispered prayers. No one dared stand against such power. No one but the Unbroken. On the bridge of the Veyara, Elias stood tall, though weariness lined his face. Around him were those who had chosen this path, Saral with her calm resolve, the scarred Drail warrior with her silent determination, the healer, the pilot, and countless others. They were not a great fleet, not an empire's army. Their ships were patched and trembling, their weapons few. Against the empire they were less than dust, yet not one of them turned away. Elias opened a channel. His voice would carry across every signal, every frequency, into the ears of friend and foe alike. He did not shout. He did not rage. His words were clear, steady, and filled with fire. We were forgotten once. Our worlds turned to ash, our voices silenced. But we endure. We are humanity, unbroken, and we will not kneel. The words spread like lightning. To the oppressed they were a trumpet of hope. To the tyrants they were thunder at the edge of a storm. And for a heartbeat the galaxy seemed to fall still, as though the stars themselves were listening. Then the silence shattered. The Empire's fleets advanced, weapons igniting, their firestorm pouring across the void. The Unbroken answered, not with overwhelming might, but with defiance. Their ships darted and struck, fragile as sparks yet burning bright. They shielded one another, fought for one another, bled for one another. Every strike against them only forged their resolve. Elias was everywhere, on the bridge, in the comms, in the hearts of those who fought beside him. He spoke when despair threatened to swallow them. He reminded them that no empire was eternal, that fire spreads even when embers are few. And wherever his voice carried, courage blossomed. The battle raged. The Unbroken were outnumbered 100-1. Ships fell, names were lost, lives extinguished. Yet still they fought, and for every vessel that perished, 10 more voices across the galaxy rose in defiance, declaring themselves unbroken too. On worlds enslaved, chains were shattered. On stations long silenced, banners were raised. The Empire struck with fury, but the more it struck, the more the fire spread. Hope is not easily crushed once it takes root. At the height of the battle, when the fleets closed upon the Veyara, Elias stood once more before the viewport. The galaxy seemed to tremble. Around him, his companions waited for his final command. He placed his hand against the glass, eyes burning. "Even if we fall," he said, "let it be known we did not bow." And then, with voices united, the Unbroken surged. What followed was chaos and fire, but also light. The Empire's fleets reeled before the fury of those who refused to kneel, and though the outcome of the battle was written in sacrifice, something greater had already been won. For when the galaxy paused to listen, to the words of a human long thought lost, to the cry of the Unbroken, it felt silence fall. Not the silence of despair, but the silence of awe. The stars themselves seemed to listen, and in that silence a legend was reborn. Humanity had returned. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as fire, and the fire would never die again.